for me? When I was a little girl, I used to climb up into the apple tree in my backyard. And I used to lean my back against the trunk of that old tree. And I used to scribble in the notebook that I had dragged up into that tree with me. I wanted to write a book someday. And I imagine there are some people here listening today who have had that thought, that they would love to be a published author. They would love to write a book. And I can say that with some confidence because statistics say that 80% of the North American population has had the idea at some point that they would like to write a book. And a lot of them don't get started. As it turns out, only 40% of that 80% actually starts to write their book. And those are the people, you might be one of them, who open a file on their computer, maybe a Word doc, and they start typing away on their Word document. Or maybe they go to a nice bookstore and they buy one of those beautiful books, you know, the ones with the really nice covers, and they open it up and there's a blank sheet of paper staring at them. And they start writing their anecdotes and ideas they have, and maybe a mind map in there, and visual images of what should go in that book. And they get very, very excited about starting the book. Well, writing a book is a pretty big project. And as it turns out, only 2% of that 40% actually finish writing their book. And I want to talk today about that very thing. What is it that makes someone in the 40% or even the 80% cohort actually become a 2%er? There's a big difference between starting to write your book and actually finishing it. And I'm pretty qualified to talk about this, actually, because I am the traditionally published author of 4 books so far, with my 5th book coming out this year, and about 10 other ones piled up behind those ones. They're my 80% category, those books. I still got a big pile of books that I want to write someday. And I also am a book coach and an editor. So I help people come from the 80% to the 40% to the 2% of publication. And I've observed that there are a number of things that go into becoming a 2%er, both from my own experience and from helping other people get there. Bunch of stuff is involved. One of them is definitely divine timing. It's right or it isn't quite right. So some of it, the timing thing, has to come into play. Another important piece is motivation. If you're really motivated to get that book done, it's going to happen. Another piece is about strategy. We writers love to believe that everything is all conceptual and creative, and writing a book is highly creative. It is highly creative, and if you don't have that structured piece in place, you're going to be creating forever and not landing it. So the strategy is really important part of writing a book too. And then finally, another little piece of it is about getting the help you need in order to get where you want to go. But really where I want to focus today is on the motivation and the strategy that people need to get there. So I grew up, obviously, and there came a point in my life when I was pregnant with my family's 4th child, my blended family. We had ended up with 5 kids altogether, but I was pregnant with my 2nd child and our family's 4th. And I decided that was a good time to start writing my novel. You know, I was older, and I had lots of good life behind me, and it was time. It was really time to start writing that book. So I jumped from the 80% to the 40% when my son was on his way. And it should have been pretty darn easy for me. I'm a professional writer by trade. I've worked in journalism, I've worked in government communications and corporate communications, and I worked for a number of years as a marketing copywriter, got the writing piece handled, I've been edited a lot, I'm very comfortable writing. And at the time, my husband and I lived in a beautiful big house on a beach. And so I would get up in the morning and take my 2 dogs out to the beach, and we'd stroll along this gorgeous beach, throw the stick for the dogs, get all sandy and fresh aired up, and then go into the house and climb up the stairs and get into my beautiful office that overlooked this gorgeous lake, and I'd write. And I just was having the time of my life. But as it turned out, at the end of 9 months, The baby was finished, and the book was not. And so began about a 10-year journey for me of staying in that 40% category. I would work away at that book a little bit. But, you know, my husband and I moved a lot, and I had another baby. And, oh, gosh, writing a book wasn't going to make any money for the family, really. It was a vanity project. Who did I think I was to want to write a book? Who was going to want to read my book anyway? I wasn't anybody famous or anybody important in the world. And so there were a lot of roadblocks for me to getting that book done. At about the 10-year mark, my husband was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and then he died. And there I was. At that point, we had two young children still, a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. I had to retool my entire life. And in that process, one of the things I realized was that there are no promises. And if I actually wanted to become a published author, I had to get my act together, and I had to make it happen, because I didn't know if I was going to have enough time to get that book done. So there was a little bit of fear involved in my motivation to complete that book, but as it happened, it was powerful motivation. I got myself organized, I finished that book, and lo and behold, in 2011, I became a traditionally published author. So that was my motivation story. I'd like to share a few stories of my clients as well, in case you're out there thinking maybe you kind of need a little bit of inspiration to get to the point where you get your book out there. One of my clients was sentenced to a 5,000-year jail sentence. I know, what? For blowing the whistle on corruption in his small African country. As it turned out, he didn't have to serve 5,000 years. They let him out before the 5,000 years was done. But he came out of that experience bound and determined to move the dial on democracy in his country. And his book is all about his experiences and what happened to him, and a call to action for people of all nations to safeguard democracy, because it truly is a very precious, precious part of our society. Another one of my clients is a descendant of a Scottish family who were instrumental in developing the Canadian economy and, of course, the Canadian landscape. They were shippers. They started one of the first shipping lines going from Glasgow to Montreal. And these people, man, they were tough. They had the worst possible situation to contend with. They had storms, and they had a harsh environment, and there were challenges, shall we say, with the indigenous people who weren't exactly delighted to have them showing up in Canada. But they were tough people, and they were determined people. And my client wanted to write their story to honor her family and to honor the absolutely determined people who started this country and opened it up for settlement. Another one of my clients was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis one day. She was a young lady, physically very active, and absolutely shattered by this diagnosis. And she went along with conventional treatment for quite a while until she realized this treatment was killing her. She was pumping her body full of chemicals and not reacting well at all. And one day she'd had enough, and she said no more, quit her treatment, and found her way to another protocol, a wellness-related protocol. And within about a year, she was diagnosed as MS-free. And now she's a coach. She helps other people with chronic diseases with her protocol leave that issue, that symptom behind. She decided to write her book to save lives. So these all sound like pretty lofty goals and pretty lofty people. But actually, all of my clients are pretty much like everybody sitting here. They're hardworking people. They have a goal to run a business or to do a good job at whatever it is they're doing. They are excited by the opportunity available to humanity. They want to serve. And one of the things they know, is there is no more powerful way of changing the world than through the medium of a written book. And so if you have ever had that thought, if you're in the 80% or the 40%, know that it can be done. That just need a little more motivation maybe to get past that goal line. I also talked about strategies. And so one day after I guess it was my third book was written, my publisher came to me in January one day, and he said, you know, I think it would be a good idea for you to write a book about content marketing. That's one of my businesses. I'm a book coach and editor, and I also provide content marketing services with my team. And I went, yes, what a great idea. I would love to write a book about content marketing. And he said, great, I need the manuscript in July. And I said, are you crazy? Like, July, that's 7 months. My first book took 13 years to write. I mean, like, we're not talking speed demon here with the writing. I mean, the second and third had been a little faster. But I thought, okay, well, it sure would be pretty nifty to have a content marketing book out there. It would support my business. I have a few little bit unusual ideas about marketing. And I thought, okay, challenge accepted. I will do that. However, at the time I was and still am I'm a widowed mom, as I mentioned. I had 2 teenage kids at home. We have 1 licensed driver at this point in my life. Also, we have band practice. We had 2 part-time jobs. We had volunteer gigs that I had to get my kids to. I have a disabled elderly mom who lives 15 minutes away. She needs her share of attention too. So between all of this going on, and I run 2 businesses, it didn't really feel to me like I had time to write a book. But I did the math, and I recognized, now I know how quickly I write and what I need for my strategy. I had my strategy figured out, and I realized if I were to get myself out of bed every morning 6 days a week at 4:30 and write till 6 in the morning, I would have enough time to get that book done by July when my publisher needed it. And so that's what I did. And that was my strategy. It wasn't very friendly, I have to say. No, my workday starts typically at 6, so 4:30 was kind of nudging me a little bit into the darkness, the dark side there. But I did it. How badly did I want it? I was highly motivated to do it, and I created a strategy. So here are some of the strategies some of my clients use as well. Like that one sounds a bit extreme, but not many people have the kind of demands on their time that I had at the time. So I have one client, and he has a full-time job. He's in the investment industry. He has an hour-long commute to work every day. And he uses that hour in the train every morning, and he pulls out his iPad and he taps away on his book. His first book came out about 1.5 years ago, and he's working on the second one now. Another one of my clients, she makes an appointment with herself every Saturday morning from 9 to noon. It's a meeting. It's not she just wants to go out and have coffee. She has a meeting with herself in a local coffee shop, and for those 3 hours every single week, she writes her book. I have another client who, you know what, she wanted to write her book, but she didn't want to inconvenience herself very much to do it, and she simply set a deadline of 1 chapter every 2 months. And she met that deadline. I mean, she was serious about the deadline, but it gave her enough time. I mean, 8 weeks is plenty of time to write 3,000 words, I think. And she was able to get her book done that way. So there are lots of other ways of doing it. It requires a little bit of creativity. You know, you have to know who you are and how you work. The divine timing is certainly important. The motivation, if you don't want it badly enough, you're probably not going to get there. And the strategy is also very key. And of course, I did get some help with mine. Towards the end of coming up to publication, I did work with a book consultant, and I also hired an editor, a very, very expensive editor, and got the book done. So I want to leave you with a little something today. So I believe in inspiration. And there is a poem that has been a really big part of my life. It has inspired me a lot, not just as a book writer or a book coach or a business person or a mom. I mean, just for almost everything in my life. There are, for all of us, those red zone days where we don't want to get out of bed at 4:30, or there are things that we don't want to do. It's a little bit harder to get our act together. But I have found this poem to be really, really helpful for me, and I'm going to read it out to you today just to leave you with something that might be helpful for you too. And you may have heard of it before. It was actually written in 1905 by a man by the name of Walter Wintle, and it's called The Man Who Thinks He Can. If you think you are beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you'd like to win but you think you can't, it's almost a cinch you won't. If you think you'll lose, you've lost. For out in this world we find success begins with a fellow's will. It's all in the state of mind. If you think you're outclassed, you are. You've got to think high to rise. You've got to be sure of yourself before you can ever win the prize. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but sooner or later, the man who wins is the one who thinks he can. Best wishes for great writing for everyone.